Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see everybody here. I hope you've had a great time here at CES. My name is Don Fancher. I am a principal at Deloitte. I lead our forensic and financial crime practice in the firm. I also co-lead our legal business solutions practice. And along with my partner here, Michael Bondar, I'm one of the leaders of our enterprise trust practice. And we're here today because we are here to talk about how to build trust in digital and how to drive business performance through that trust. I'm joined by an amazing panel today. I have Kabir Barday, Cynthia Stoddard, Elena Kvachko, and Michael Bondar. And instead of me droning on a little bit and reading a bio, why don't each of you just take a few seconds and share with everybody who you are, what your role is, and a little bit of information. Kabir, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kabir Barday. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called OneTrust. We have a SaaS platform that helps companies operationalize all aspects of privacy, security, ESG, and GRC, and we call that Trust Intelligence.
My name is Cynthia Stoddard. I'm the CIO of Adobe. If you don't know who Adobe is, many people do, but if you don't, we have wonderful creative tools, Document Cloud, and what we call our Experience Cloud as well, which handles a lot of different marketing aspects. I've been there for about 6.5 years, and I have responsibility for all applications, infrastructure, cloud, cloud operations, a whole bunch of stuff. So glad to be here.
My name is Elena Kvachko. I'm the Chief Trust Officer at SAP, and my team aims to provide one-stop shop for all of our customers on matters of cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance.
And good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Hopefully this is an opportunity to at least rest your legs a little bit if you've been walking for the last couple of days. My name is Michael Bondar. I'm a principal at Deloitte, and my role is to lead our enterprise trust practice. What we do is help companies understand what is trust in the business world. What does that actually mean? This really big, amorphous topic. Beyond understanding, we want to help them measure and manage this seemingly complex topic and then take action to become more trusted organizations. So thank you for being here and looking forward to the conversation.
So why are we all here today? We want to talk about trust. And we want to talk about trust because we've seen trust become such a much greater level of interest and importance, especially in the last 3 to 4 years as we've been coming into and out of a pandemic. And we know that technology has a real key and important role in driving that trust, but also it can have an impact on eroding trust. So we're going to talk about trust and technology to start, but before we even do that, why don't we just define trust, what trust means to us from an enterprise perspective, and give each of you a little bit of context around that. I'm going to start with you, Michael, if you could, because we've spent time at Deloitte actually defining trust and putting a lot of work into this, and then ask each of you just to respond to that and then add your own perspectives.
Yeah, thanks, Don. This is a big word, and I think all of us have a understanding from our personal lives of what it means. In the context of business, perhaps it's not so simple. So about 3 years ago, we started to try to better understand this topic ourselves and define it for ourselves. And so we worked with academics, we worked with industry experts, we looked at longitudinal studies, we looked at anecdotal examples of what happens when companies lose trust, and what does it all mean. And so what we came up with is not only definition, but a framework to help bring this topic to life in a very meaningful and pragmatic way for organizations. And it begins, as you're glancing at the slide behind us here, with this idea of competence and intent. And the yin and yang is intentional there because it must be in balance. We believe that organizations must be highly competent in what they do, but also illustrate the right intent. And the right intent is in the eye of the beholder, and the beholder being that wide range of stakeholders with whom all these organizations must build relationships. Doing that results in the 4 factors being indicated. You see that on the slide as well: capability, reliability, humanity, and transparency. But to stop at that level, we found was insufficient. To simply tell you you're high on competence, low at intent, to measure at that level, that doesn't say a whole heck of a lot. And so we went levels and levels deeper. We identified what is now 18 domains that disproportionately impact trust in the enterprise. And that disproportionate impact is important. A lot of things make an impact, but these in particular we saw have real resonance. And then underneath these domains are what is now over 90 trust drivers, which are the actions, the programs, the processes, the steps companies have to take in order to earn that trust from these different stakeholder groups. You can see some of this on the slide. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but rest assured, that level of detail, that level of practicality is required in order for companies to make progress in this area. So hopefully this brings the context to what we mean by trust.
Guys?
Yeah, I'm happy to add to that. First of all, I think the work, Michael, your team's done to codify trust in the business context is really powerful. And the way I've heard trust explained very simply to me is trust is about making sure your actions as a business are consistent with the commitments you've made. Now, some of those commitments are implicit. Like, you don't have to say we're not a fraudulent company for people to imply that you're not going to do things fraudulent. But a lot of those trust commitments are now very explicit in ESG commitments, privacy commitments, security commitments, ethics commitments. And so all of those have to be consistent. I think it's also not to say that companies aren't going to screw up and make mistakes. I think every company is going to face some sort of mistake or trust-breaking event. And I think that's where, Michael, I love the concept of intent. And the other aspect is you talk about this disproportionate 18 domains. When you put that in the context of a business trying to implement and operationalize trust, not all 18 domains are going to be appropriate for every single business. And most companies will go through a process called materiality and understanding which of these issues are closest to what your stakeholders care about, that you want to really lean into, and that can help drive a tighter definition internally within an organization.
Yeah, I think that's great. I totally agree with everything you've said. I think that, if you think about, actions speak louder than words. The actions that you take really matter to demonstrate, where you're going. But it's also what you say, right? And what you align, what values that you have as an organization. So making sure that those values that you have, that you're able to support, you have the actions, appropriately put into place, I think is really important. The only thing I would add to what you said is transparency.
Yeah.
Right? And I think you touched on it a little bit at the end, but didn't, call it out, because if you need to be transparent about what happens
Yeah.
and what you can and cannot do. I mean, when I work with a partner, I always want to know what can't they do, right? Because there's always, a whole bunch of great material about this, that, and the other thing. But tell me the negative side too.
Yeah.
And if something is going wrong, then make sure that you communicate it. So the transparency, because that builds trust. When you go through a difficult time with a partner, that builds a lot of trust because you're communicating and going down that path. So that's what I would add to your.
I love that.
Yeah, and Cindy, to add to what you were saying, we're definitely relying on a lot of the same definitions and components of trust. To kick off our panel, Don was saying that we're actually living in the world of trust deficit, and if we just look back on what happened over the holidays, we'll see that there was a lot of disruption of trust, from cryptocurrency industry to airline industry to social media industry. And what it showed to me is that merely creating a position or writing a policy or just declaring is not enough to earn trust, right? So if a company provides a service, there's an expectation that service will work as described. If the company provides a product, there's an expectation that it's reliable. Actually, some of the research findings done by our partner company showed that trustworthy companies outperform other companies by almost 2.5 times if we look at the KPIs. So for us at SAP, definition of trust is specifically centered around the notions of cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance, and this is something that we are very much doubling down on in my team. So to make all of that to make all of the trust components actionable, I believe that companies need to say and do what they preach. For instance, if we say that we want to be more transparent with our customers, we inform them about the events that directly impact them. Yes. And to make it more measurable, organizations can start with some of the metrics that they already have, such as the NPS scores, the renewal rates, or even some of the qualitative feedback, and all of that can serve companies to make more informed decisions about trust.
And so again, one of the reasons we're here at CES, obviously technology is at the forefront, And interestingly, Elena, every single example you just gave, I would argue, has technology at the core of what is important to that organization and has an impact on trust. So I want to touch on that a little bit more with each of you, and I'm going to start with you, Kabir, because you actually named your company OneTrust.
Yeah.
So you kind of put trust at the forefront of your own organization and what you're trying to accomplish. But talk a little bit about what you're seeing as far as trends
Yeah.
relative to technology and the impact on trust, and how that's driving behaviors and responses from various stakeholders.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. And, we're seeing a really massive tectonic shift in how trust operates in the business environment. And it used to be that trust was really seen as a compliance initiative or a downside protection, risk reduction. Am I complying with the marketing requirements and complying with product safety rules, complying with privacy laws, complying with my ethics laws? And there was very little seen strategically about that. It was really a cost center. That's completely changed, and now trust is seen as an organization's ultimate competitive advantage, a value creator. It's used in the ads on the billboard of Apple, of privacy, and it's completely changed that perception. And that change has been driven off of this societal and generational shift that's happened, especially accelerated in the Gen Z. And it's driven by everyone here and all people around the world, that the demands and expectations people are putting on business today in terms of what good looks like is different. And above all else, it's trust. And when you think about your stakeholders, whether it's customers, investors choosing to invest in you, employees, whether they want to come work for you, they're asking all the same questions. Can I trust you with my data? Can I trust your ethics and integrity? Can I trust your decisions are risk informed? Can I trust you're doing good for people and the planet? And so these now are embedded as commercial, business, strategic issues. These are the top 5 issues on any CEO's agenda. How do I hire the best people, keep my investors happy, and win more customers and make sure they're loyal? And so at OneTrust, we've identified really 4 key areas, very consistent with what Elena mentioned, that are the most material to the industry and enterprises today, and that's privacy, security, ethics, and ESG commitments.
And I know, Cindy, you've dealt with this Adobe as a customer-centric organization.
Yes.
What are you guys doing to expand on what Kabir talked about and just this general issue of technology and trust and how you're using that for the Adobe brand?
Well, to build on that, and actually what Elena was saying, we actually also have a trust office, right? So we've brought together, legal, compliance, accessibility, a whole bunch of standards, a whole bunch of stuff together into the organization so that we can service our customers. And I think it's a great way to look at it. I mean, some people say, how can this fit into a legal organization? I don't know if you get that question. But to me, it's just a logical expansion of what the legal organization does. Because if I think about the work that I do as a CIO, legal has always been my partner. They've always been my partner on a number of different fronts. And as we look to expand our products and make sure that our content is secure, that it's authentic, you work with compliance and you need to understand, different regulations around the world because it's much different. So bringing it all together within the organization, I think is a really good way to look at all the different problems and come up with holistic end-to-end solutions as opposed to just point solutions going across. And that allows us to service our customers and actually build that level of trust. Customers don't want to worry about, when they buy a product, does it work for GDPR or is it HIPAA compliant or whatever that. They expect the company that they buy that product from to have all of that security and all of that compliance in place. Now, to your point, we're not perfect, right? Nobody's perfect. But if you have that transparency and the communication with your customer, you can work through the issues and work through new things that come up, new rules, new regulations. So that's how we approach it.
And you mentioned, Cynthia, you have a trust office now in Adobe.
Yes.
And we're very fortunate because we actually have one of the very first chief trust officers of a major organization right here with us, Elena. So talk about that a little bit more, because And it really is something that's happened in the last few years. I think I saw Fortune had an article about this maybe a year and a half ago, Michael,
Yeah.
2 years maybe. You were actually ahead of the curve. But talk a little bit about the C-suite, the recognition of trust at the C-suite level and the importance of it, and why you at SAP made the decision to actually put a chief trust officer in place, and then now coming forward a little bit, how that strategy is working and what you're seeing from an impact
Yeah.
perspective.
So Don, we at SAP actually identified that there was a need to have an executive that's focused on day-to-day trust issues. We started our organization and launched our organization in April of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic times. And we didn't really have a playbook to follow, but we knew this was the right thing to do, and we got a lot of support from within the company. So now, out of curiosity, we actually just counted how many trust offices are out there, and from what I have seen, there about 10% of Fortune 100 organizations now have a trust officer or an equivalent role. And I think from my perspective, and my prediction is that this number will only going to grow. In terms of my mandate and what my team is focused on, we actually have a pretty broad mandate across the company. We support thousands of customer-related requests, deals, questionnaires, anything customer-facing that has to do with privacy, security, and compliance. With this shift left trend in mind, we're also incorporating a lot of training and awareness efforts into the different cycles of our product development. We have an advisory function, as Cindy was mentioning, that specifically focuses on complex process changes or regulations and looks into how, what potential changes we need to incorporate. We have a group that's specifically focused on ecosystem management, stakeholder management, customer advisory boards, where we have a chance to listen to the feedback from the customers and incorporate that. And we also have a content function and some of the products of this function you can find on the SAP Press, SAP Store, and I'm actually hosting a Trust Corner podcast in the efforts to promote some of the thought leadership around trust. So we're very excited to see this domain grow.
Well, and we've seen in all of the work that we've done, and even talking to the C-suite executives, ultimately, trust is the responsibility of the entire executive. The board has a responsibility, but I think it's so important to actually identify, just like you would for finance, like you would for marketing, for compliance, you identify somebody specifically responsible for it, and you guys, and now, as you said, others are doing that in trust. And I know, Kabir, you've even done that at OneTrust. You've put, I believe, Kim into a more responsible role.
Yeah, very consistent with Elena's philosophy. The chief, it's exactly what you said. There's got to be accountability and seniority and board level visibility and oversight. And I'm sure, Elena, you directly interact with board members day to day, because there are checks and balances and there are nuances to your role that require those types of interactions. So I think that's important as well. You can't bury this and fake it. It's got to be strategic.
And within technology, as we've been talking about, trust is super important. But when you start getting into the next level, what I would call digital, cyber, ethical AI, which frankly, in my opinion, is something we're not talking enough about and need to be talking a lot more about that. All of these issues from a very specific digital perspective become even more and more important. And I'd like to unpack some of that. And Cindy, I'll start with you. And talk a little bit about this, the digital component of what you're doing at Adobe and how that's been impacted from an employee perspective as well as a customer perspective. And even because of what you're doing at Adobe in the cloud transformation, how that's being impacted in that regard.
Yeah, digital, everything we do is digital, right? You have to think back to the past to think about how you operated without a cell phone or text messages and things like that. But it's the foundation of everything that we do. It's, communication, how we find information, how we look at content. So, in my organization at Adobe, what we have done is we created what we call a customer experience organization. I took everything that touches I'm dealing with employee first. We took everything that touches the employee and put it all in one place. And if you think about a traditional IT organization, your telephony would be over here, your collaboration tools would be over here, this and that would be all over the place. Well, I picked it up and put it all together in one organization. And their responsibility is to make the experience of the employee great. At Adobe, work with our customers to make their experiences great with their customers, and we're trying to use the same philosophy internally with our customers. So, digital tools, making sure that they're persona-based. So when we launched this organization, we said, hey, we're not just going to have one size fits all. We're going to look at the different personas of the workers within Adobe. So you might be a builder, which is an engineer, or you might be a communicator, which is an executive. So different tools are needed. And, we worked with the employees, and I would have to say that it helped us a lot. Over the past, few years during COVID, we were able to have a seamless click over, and people had the tools, and we were able to gear response time, security, for code uploads and things like that to what we needed to do. So that's the employee side. On the customer side, customers want to go digital, right? They recognize that they have to be digital. They recognize that they need to move services to the cloud. So they're very interested in how we've approached our journey. What did you do? How did you approach moving your assets into the cloud? How did you approach, changing your business processes on the backside? These are all things that we talk to our customers day in and day out about, and sometimes using our tools, of course, but sometimes it's how do they move their legacy systems into the cloud? So on the customer side, it's really looking at they want to become more digital, more productive, and bring that to the customer base.
Privacy and security is clearly a key component of that, I would think, as
Yes.
well. And we certainly hear that. We see that all the time. It's forefront. Kabir, you deal with that every day. That's,
Yeah.
again, what you're doing with OneTrust. Talk about some of the impacts you're seeing and the advances we're making and why that privacy-related issue is so
Yeah.
important for trust.
Yeah, so it's important to first remember the difference between privacy and security, and certainly they're overlapping, but security is about the data, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that data. Privacy is about a human, it's about a person, and it's about the fundamental human rights of a person. Those are different things and require different ways of thinking about it and managing those things. And so when you think about privacy, it's about how do I enable the rights to be given back to the user whose data we are hosting and we're stewards of. And so it's required companies to build entirely new programs and processes and disciplines overlapping and collaborating with security, but thinking more about how do I track all the data I have and whose data it is? How do I make sure I tag and annotate that data with the right consent and purpose? How do I then give the rights back to that user so if they want to access or delete that data, you have access to? That's required a new infrastructure most companies have needed to implement, and it's required all technology vendors, like all three of our companies, to build things into our own technology stack to facilitate that for our customers. So I think the complexity in the regulatory environment around privacy has driven this new discipline, specifically around privacy, that's tangential, but a little bit different than security, equally important.
And you talk about privacy being essentially a human right. That hasn't always been the case, but certainly that's become recognized, thankfully, now. But I also know, Elena, for you, the ability to take all the things we're talking about at this bigger, higher level of how do we create more trust, how do we put more components in place to execute on that, but do it in a way that is fair to everyone, that is recognized by everyone as being appropriate. And how do we use diversity as a means to drive that? And you've done that at SAP. You've got an extremely diverse team. But beyond just the team being diverse, talk about why that diversity is so important in this arena.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I do believe, and that's actually one of my personal mission, is to help increase diversity in our industry. I'm very proud to say that we have achieved the 50-50 gender distribution at the manager level, and at the employee level, we're now 52% women, actually. So we're very proud of that. I would recommend for organizations to first start with looking at their hiring practices. Where where are candidates coming from? What else could be done to source more diverse candidates? And frequently, it's almost it's advisable to even look at your existing workforce, because your existing workforce are the best, or can be the best advocates for your own business. I would also encourage organizations to look at the practices, but also just the language that's used in the everyday environment. For instance, our company is using neutral language in the job descriptions. That's not going to deter the candidate. So that's something that we've discovered. My personal belief is to give an opportunity and a chance to people when they may not have all the right skills in place at the moment, but they have the right attitude, and just see if they would surprise you. And then finally, Dawn, I would say is look at the tangential skills. For instance, in the first glance, there may not be a direct correlation or a direct link between the job and the skill, but very often the skills can be transferable. For instance, somebody with a good writing skill could be an asset to a lot of teams within the organization. Or even if you think of something that's like completely unrelated, such as event management, can they potentially consider? Can they be considered for a role within a cybersecurity defense organization, where they also have to manage so many different stakeholders, provide responses, manage the different timelines, work with so many different expectations, and entities. So. At the first glance, it may not seem obvious, but if you really are focused on diversity, it is possible. And I really hope that it's not going to take 170 years, as the reports predict, to bridge that gender gap.
Well, and when you talk about diversity, and I love the way you describe it, because we have a tendency to think about diversity as male versus female or gender specific. And those are hugely important and hugely valuable. But as you just said, it's diversity of thought, it's diversity of experiences, it's diversity of capabilities. And if you bring all of that into context with one another, then when you're looking at intent, when you're looking at the way you deliver and the expectations of how you deliver, you're taking all of those experiences into the discussion, and the decisions you make are going to be far more appropriate in how you actually deliver that. And I think, again, when we're talking about ethical technology, ethical AI, and building all these experiences, that diversity is hugely important. And I know, Michael, we've looked at some of these issues very specifically to the tech sector and to digital around the way organizations are seeing impacts. And so can you talk a little bit about the research that we've done specifically to technology?
Well, I think, first of all, it was great, Cindy, how you described your customers are also your employees. Your employees are your customers in a way. And so when you think back to those 17 or 18 domains we flashed up, a lot of the things the panelists just talked about, they're represented in that framework in a very real way. You heard how these companies are addressing these issues. I think what we did in this study that you're seeing flashed up on the screen that's quite interesting is we tried to break it down to the very molecular level and quantify the impact of the actions companies take in this area on behavior, which is ultimately what we're all chasing. We want to make sure our employees come work for us, stay employed by us, our customers remain with us, buy our products, speak positive about our brand. And can trust influence that? And the answer is unequivocally yes. And it's quite substantial if you consider this example here. So we looked at B2C and B2B customers. Specifically within the US, we had to rein in the scope a little bit to make it manageable. And we looked at the technology sector in particular. What we saw when we looked at those individual trust-driving actions is that each one of them had an impact on customer behavior, both B2B and B2C. And that impact was felt both in a positive sense, if the company did the right thing, did it competently, did it for the right reasons, that intent component, or negative sense, if the company failed to live up to those expectations or did not demonstrate that intent. And you see these numbers flash up here. There's an old saying, trust is built in droplets and lost in buckets. Check out these numbers, right? So 90 drivers, each one of them had the perhaps seemingly small impact, a 5% uptick in going out of your way to purchase the brand. But when you total that up and aggregate the drivers together, that's a pretty significant uptick if each one of them has about that same percent uptick, an uplift. Yet on the inverse of that, if the company did not demonstrate that competence intent, consider the negative repercussions. They're substantial, they're catastrophic. So it plays out and it shows itself in a very real, quantifiable, and quite impactful way.
So let's now take that and build it on kind of one of the last point. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to talk about trust equity. because we've talked about the importance of trust, we've talked about the impact of trust, positive, negative, technology's role in all of that. But ultimately, this is about building value and using trust to build value. Michael, I'm going to start with you. Just define trust equity, if you would, for everyone in the room and how we think about that.
Well, I love this concept of trust equity. I mean, when you think about, oftentimes we think about trust in the context of a negative event. We've had a cyber breach, we've had an ethical violation, some sort of misconduct took place, and we've got to rebuild that trust. And that is table stakes. Of course, that has to happen. The notion of trust equity, though, is being much more proactive, much more strategic and intentional about this big topic. Build trust before a breakdown occurs. Consider creating that layer of resilience around the organization, around your leadership team, each individual within that leadership team, so that if you do make a misstep, that misstep could be a blip on the radar versus a catastrophic event. So taking proactive steps to build trust creates that layer of resilience, that trust equity, and then you can draw upon those reserves at times of crisis.
And one of the crises that we saw in the world, and I know we're probably actually like kind of tired of the pandemic being a reference point, and yet it's such an impactful reference point. And Cindy, I know you guys dealt with this at Adobe in a big way. We're all dealing with this. How do you go to virtual, in-office, hybrid employees? And in the context of what we're talking about, how does that impact this issue of trust equity? And what do we do with it to ensure that we're creating trust equity? And I would love to start with you, Cindy, and then have Kabir, you add on, because you've had some great experiences that you've shared with us on this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Yes, we did deal with the pandemic, and we were able to click over and be virtual, but it took a lot of work, right? I mean, we were prepared technology-wise, but what took a lot of work was the people side. And, people needed to feel comfortable that they could work from home, right? That it was, that it was going to be secure, that they would have the tools that they would need, that they could be productive, that, they weren't being watched, all these different things. So we did, at Adobe, we did a lot of communication at various levels, starting with our, CEO, our CHRO, all of our SVPs, we were all communicating. And it helped with the employees because we took a lot of care to make sure that their needs were met. I mean, really during the whole pandemic, employees were number one. When we clicked over, we had a lot of training. We didn't have any more, help within the offices. So we set up virtual help within Slack channels to communicate with people. So we were able to do a lot of work with the employees that way. We looked at what their issues were. We looked at, you talk about AI, we looked at recurring issues, and we were able to, apply AI and ML in order to answer their questions, programmatically a lot faster. So we did all of that. And then we also noticed that people weren't taking a lot of time off, right? They wanted to be glued into their box, right? Their box on Teams or, Zoom or whatever your choice is. So we mandated a global days off, right, where the whole company would just shut down. I mean, it was great, right, because there's no email, no nothing. You would just really take a rest.
Anything you're seeing now on the go forward at Adobe that is shifting or changing any of that, or impacting the way you look at now and the future?
We want to keep the goodness that we learned during the pandemic, because the pandemic and being in boxes created a level playing field for employees. People who didn't speak up before were able to speak up equally, right? So we're working very hard, looking at the workspaces that we have and the technologies. So as we operate in a hybrid, because we're a hybrid type workplace, 50-50, we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose that. And the employees don't want to lose that. We look at employee surveys. We take them very seriously. And then we take their feedback into what we do, just like you would with a customer.
And Kabir, again, your experiences around this have been really impactful for OneTrust. I'd love to hear that and how that's impacted your ability to drive equity using trust.
Absolutely transformative for us. And, the pandemic accelerated, 2 decades of social change in workforce norms into a 2-year period. And so for us, what we found as a hyper-growth company is we're very limited to the talent pool that was available in our headquarters city. We were in Silicon Valley, headquartered, we're in Atlanta, so you don't have the typical access to the talent that Silicon Valley or New York companies have access to. And so by leaning into that remote work trend, we realized, number one, very clearly to our employees, trust is a two-way street. If we trust them to work remote without all these monitoring tools, then they're gonna trust us in return. And then we're able to access executive talent, specialist talent at a much bigger scale. I was at our India office just a few weeks ago, and I was blown away by how the demographics had changed with women in the workplace. And in engineering in India, it's like a 95% usually men environment. And we accomplished, it was like 30 to 40% women when I was there. And when I'd interview them, they said, our ability to work remote has completely changed how we can approach our work lives. And that's both accessing different economic backgrounds, demographics, skill sets, genders, and so massively transformative. And our customers realize that and appreciate it. It's unlocked an ability for us to reach a whole new level of growth. And I think from the market's perspective, the ability for companies to compete no matter where they are anywhere in the world, there's an entirely new trajectory of a healthy competitive environment that's going to be created. The other aspect of it is the national averaging of salaries is also very good for marginalized populations, different genders, different demographics, because an engineer's an engineer now anywhere. And before, it's where you live determines where you get paid. These are all aspects that go into DE&I, trust, ESG. And to your point, I don't think it's going to take 170 years. The last 2 years has told us this can happen.
I love that, and I love the fact that all of those aspects, even though individually they may seem, small or micro components at a macro level, they're driving equity and they're increasing value. Elena, I want to come to you too, because one of the unfortunate consequences of this level of activity in the environments we find ourselves in now is the risk from a cybersecurity perspective, which is your area of expertise. You have about 30 patents in this space of cyber protection and the like. Because it is such a top-of-mind issue, and we know that cyber is a very, very quick and impactful way to erode trust for an organization, any quick advice you would give to organizations on how to view that, think about that in this context of you building trust equity as opposed to letting it erode?
Well, Don, I think if it has to be quick, I would say it could be helpful to focus on potentially worst-case scenario. And just start your planning from there. Review who has access to what assets are most critical, establish the right governance, continuously review and improve that. So I think overall, we did see a uptick in a lot of cybercrime activity through the pandemic, but we also saw increased focus of companies in terms of how they address cybersecurity and privacy issues.
So, lightning round. 30 seconds or less from each of you. One thing you would take from all this and recommend, and then Michael, I'll have you close us out. Elena, you want to start?
Sure. So Don, if I have to recommend one thing, I would say pay attention or focus on how companies' actions would be impacting stakeholders, partners, and customers, because all of that impacts trust. I really hope to see more and more organizations embracing the principles, not just cybersecurity, privacy, and compliance, but also transparency. And we hope more and more companies will actually follow suit and establish, an equivalent of a trust office where they can communicate with customers directly. And I think the need for a trust office is now clear, for companies to be able to address issues beyond cyber, but things like disrupted mass logistics or transportation or any other event and crisis. And we hope that we're going to be successful as an industry and beyond.
Cynthia?
So I would go back to, demonstrate your values, right? We talked about that earlier, but I would say that's important. Every company has a wealth of knowledge. You have, SAP has a lot of knowledge about a lot of different things, and OneTrust, we have a lot of knowledge about content. So we've launched the content authenticity, right? So, really publicly demonstrate your values and try to change the world.
Love it.
Would be mine.
Kabir?
Yeah, for me, maybe taking it a bit more operationally in the how, one of the things I would recommend is companies are just seeing a lot of complexity when you say, I got to do privacy, security by design, ethics by design, policy by design, sustainability by design. And I think thinking about things collectively from a trust perspective, embedding that into the culture and values, and building trust by design processes that require any new marketing campaign, new product launch to go through these toll gates, governed by a chief trust officer, I think is a really clean way of balancing the agility of a business with the trust requirements would be my recommendation.
I love it. That's great. Michael, how would you close it out from all the work we've done at Deloitte in this space and where we see going forward?
You know, when we approach an executive or anybody in this room and we ask you how important is trust, you're all going to quite enthusiastically say it's critical. The follow-up question on how do you define it, or what are you doing to measure, manage it, is not going to have quite as much fervor. And so let's bring together this idea of, yeah, it's critical, but if it's critical, treat it like any other asset in the business world that you consider important. Appoint someone to take care of it, manage it appropriately, and then measure it just like you would any other key asset. So that would be my advice.
Outstanding.
And one other piece of advice, you guys should come join us at the reception.
That's right.
This evening at 4:30.
We have a reception this evening at 4:30. Kate, if you want to throw that up there on the screen. You're all invited. It's at Libertine Social in Mandalay Bay, 4:30 to 7:30. Be a great time to interact more around this. We'll have some interactive screens where we actually can dive into this in greater specificity. And of course, there will be little refreshments as well that you can enjoy. So you're all invited to that. We'd love to have you. Most importantly, we really appreciate you joining us here today. Hope you've gained a little bit more knowledge around trust and the importance of trust, and most importantly, how you can impact trust. So thank you very much.